Thank you to our viewers for tuning in, and thank you to our speakers for spearheading this conversation on youth as an accelerator. My name is Marissa Ramanan. I'm a freelance reporter and a communications officer at CRAR, the Center for Research Action on Race Relations. So I'm going to let my guest speakers introduce themselves as well.
Hey there, my name is Shalaka Jaldev. I'm the Design and Community Manager at Youth Climate Lab. Youth Climate Lab is a Youth for Youth lab that's dedicated to creating innovative projects for climate action.
Hello, everyone. I'm Franz Saint-Lamy. I'm currently President and Chief Operating Officer of LeddarTech. I'm also Chairman of the board of Group 3737. And so LeddarTech is on the auto tech sector for autonomous driving. And Group 3737, we mentor entrepreneurs.
Thank you again for coming. So let's talk about the next generation. In your circles, what are the attitudes and habits of Gen Z that you believe will shape mobility policy and politics? How has the pandemic changed youth mobility? And do you think that this will affect mobility in the future?
So I can give this a go. My training is actually as an urban planner, even though I don't currently work in maybe the traditional sphere of urban planning. You know, there's a lot of thinking about movement that's really deeply rooted not only in the built environment, but also in how generational values are really shifting. And so that's why I'm really excited to hear that mobility hubs and how we value our time are trends that we're starting to see within our generation and looking forward as well. These trends are really exciting for me because they don't even just signal a shift in our priorities, but it's not just about, you know, us continuing to be connected, but that we want to stay connected and have agency in how we stay connected. You know, there's language that we're a multimodal generation, and to be clear, that's definitely been fueled by the fact that our generation is experiencing convergent generational crises. You know, there's the climate crisis. We're navigating a very necessary but painful, you know, racial reckoning, and of course the COVID-19 pandemic. And so this means that our resilience forces us into being an action-oriented generation because of our proximity to these precarious working and living conditions. And so these trends that we're seeing are really adaptations to these convergent crises, but you know, we're also pursuing and co-creating them in a way that upholds our integrity and dignity and agency.
Yeah, I would say for me, what is most compelling is the fact that the Generation Z is really taking action. So I come from the generation where, you know, essentially you had to prove yourself to the next generation to get everything, to get access to, basically it was get a good education, work hard, and then, you know, hope for the best. I think what I see in this generation is they're not hoping for the best. They're getting engaged and also taking a position, taking a voice.
There's no question that there was a strong movement around shared mobility, you know, particularly around everything that was, you know, around electrified mobility or mobility in terms of not just in the context of vehicle mobility, but also, you know, in context of where do one live and how do you live around with your environment and so forth. I think the pandemic has shown us that the shared mobility, it will come, but it has been pushed out because people are now thinking about, you know, their personal space as a sanctuary. And I think this is, until we fully get out of this pandemic mode, the situation won't change too much. But I do feel that the long-term trend of shared mobility and mobility in harmony with multimodal is here to stay.
Yeah, it's really encouraging to hear you say, Franz, that you see like our generation being really action-oriented, because I feel that too, you know, especially working with young people across the nation and across the world. And something that sometimes hurts that excitement is that there is a language evoked around individualism around Gen Z, which is really interesting to me because I don't see choices in our generation really driven by individualism. I see them as adaptation and flexibility. That is the result of insufficiency of the built environment that we've seen, you know, in the past few decades. And so when precarious and working and living conditions really force us to be flexible, and I'll say here, even flexible to a fault at sometimes, it's natural to adapt and look towards mobility options that prioritize alternatives to business as usual. And you've shared that in terms of shared mobility options. And I think that this look to alternatives has been echoed and amplified over the course of the pandemic, when those who are already in precarious conditions have been put to the test, right? And I'm really excited to see micromobility and hyperlocality emerge as trends as well, because it's time to invest in our communities and strengthen the urban fabric of where we are and our communities and our engagement in that urban fabric as well. And to me, thinking about these trends is so much bigger than just like, I'm going from place to place or destination A to B. It's really a result of the deep political changes and nature of movement, whether that's broader migration or shift in just even like workplaces and our working modality right now. And so it's really exciting to me that even in this crisis mode that we tend to be in right now, for our generation, we're not foregoing pleasure. We're prioritizing joy in the ways that we work, under these crisis modes. And it's signaling to me our outlook on how we problem solve and tackling these converging crises of our time, where our endpoint is not just, okay, I'm at destination B, let's settle in, but it is around building joy and liberation into our approach to social change and being really uncompromising in that goal at every level of action, whether it's local or not.
Well, but you've also had, as a generation, had no choice.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let's face it. I mean, reality is that we don't talk about this, but we should. The fact is, this urban movement has caused incredible inflation in cost of living.
Absolutely.
We are in a pandemic, but houses have never been more expensive across the major cities in Canada. So, and this is a global phenomenon. The cities are permanently becoming mega cities. But so the people that are moving in the cities, they're moving because, frankly, that's where the opportunities are. That's where action is happening. But at the same time, the cities have never been so expensive, so inaccessible. And I think you, as a Generation Z representative, in my mind, have no choice but to take action because this is not sustainable.
Yeah, definitely. That made me think about a lot of my friends or people in my cohort or who are part of Gen Z who are really limiting their travel. They're really kind of just traveling if they need to within about a 15-minute radius from their homes to the grocery store and doing individualistic travel like by biking or walking. That being said, how do you predict this generation will approach car ownership?
So if you look at the applications for driver's license, they've been going down for decades across North America and Europe. So the newer generation are thinking about more inclusive modes of transportation. And so I do feel that this trend isn't gonna go away. What has sustained the automotive industry are emerging markets. So countries like China are still growing, and it's still growing really fast in terms of the number of cars that are on the road. But this movement for more electrification, again, pushed on by the new generation, is something that again has been accelerated with this pandemic. I mean, Tesla is worth more than all the car manufacturers globally combined. And so it speaks volumes to the future. So I do expect that shared mobility, more autonomous, more regional, regional mean city by city, is going to happen. But I also do see a movement for more trains, electric trains, more higher frequency trains. So we're seeing it in the city of Montreal, where the new express train system will go from 5 a.m. to 2 a.m. And they'll be every 10 minutes. So for me to go from Laval to downtown, I don't need to take my car. There's absolutely no reason, because every 10 minutes I can get a train, and within 15 minutes I'm home.
So I was wondering, How will a new car ownership model be made possible through autonomous vehicles?
If you think about it, and I don't need to be a Generation Z to subscribe to this idea, but think about in the context, the same way you have a bus pass or a train pass, that same bus pass or train pass could be applied to any mode of sustainable transport, whether that's electric buses, electric train, or electric fully autonomous vehicles. And so you can think of the situation where I go from my house to downtown, use the train. Once I'm in downtown, I've got a fully electric and autonomous shuttle. And all I need to do is to replenish the same way I replenish my card for the public transportation. You can also subscribe to a subscription. You buy miles through your app on your phone. So now instead of buying a vehicle, you buy 20,000 miles for the year. And now your whole family and friends can have access to the same miles. And so I could, if we're friends, I connected, I send to you some miles because I'm not going to use them, but I prepaid for them and they're about to be expired, or maybe I share them within a network of friends. So this autonomous movement is going to change the way mobility happens, but at the same time, it's going to democratize transportation for the masses. It's going to render it less expensive. But today, the whole idea of a vehicle is a status symbol. It's personal. It's the demonstration of one's success. It's a demonstration of one's access. But in a context where anyone can actually access mobility, for the same price, there's no status anymore. And I think this is the direction that we're going to see the car industry evolving to, where you won't need to own a vehicle.
Yeah, if it's okay, Marissa, I actually want to also address the question of car ownership, especially as a non-driver. And I think it does touch on the questions of Gen Z as well. So like I flipped earlier, I'm 25 years old. I don't know how to drive. I've tried to learn, and of course, because of the pandemic, the testing is so backed out that I don't know when I'll really be able to get in there, And the reason I want to share this is because it's something that's been reinforced as a bad thing for a lot of my life. So I remember in my undergraduate degree, many jobs actually asked and required a driver's license, or said it in a discrete manner. So the manner was, you need to require reliable and independent transportation options. And so to me, I always thought this was super strange, especially in a field like urban planning, right? So why aren't we seeing public transportation and cycling as reliable and independent options? And if we don't see them as these options, why aren't we working to make them reliable and independent by investing in the built environment and deprioritizing that car-oriented mindset? So I think there's this really interesting moment where we see conventional, gas-driven cars as the only reliable and independent transportation option, and we really need to move away from that. And I think some of the options in the Kantar study really demonstrate that, and a willingness to do that. And so I'm even thinking, within this opportunity of reliability and independence, how are we also making sure that we're not just building for able-bodied folks, but also for people with disabilities? Because reliable and independent mobility shouldn't just be reserved for those with wealth and means, but also to be equitably built across race and class and gender and disability. Because it's quite naive to think that mobility conversations are agnostic of our identities, right? We're unfortunately surveilled and policed through mobility through the lens of race and class and gender and disability. And it's really important to embed that into the conversation of how we move forward. And I know that kind of seems a little bit away from car ownership, but these are things that I've been thinking about ever since I saw that job application, and have continued to see job applications that ask for that. And I think it really is something that we need to think about in the conversation of mobility and ownership.
In terms of transportation, what do you think are the needs or expectations of Gen Z on public authorities, cities, and governments?
Yeah, I think in these spaces, it's been exciting to see the emergence of e-scooters and e-bikes to sort of fill these gaps again that policy might be slow in responding to. But it's so essential that we're thinking about the whole life cycle of these products, right? So this life cycle thinking is really about thinking about every stage where it lands, every user that is interacting with these products. And it's really important to do that work and develop that work through the thinking through of connection to land and reconnection to land. Because if we don't have that connectivity to land, we are not going to move forward in a way that brings us all on the same level and that builds back together and better from COVID-19. And yeah, that reconnection to land work, the reason I keep bringing it up is because it's central to move forward to build just climate resilient futures across any sector, and especially in mobility, which often gets left out of these conversations because we tend to look at it in a technological way only.
And Franz, what do you think?
So when we talk about mobility is a problem, is not just a problem for Western world Generation Z. It's also a global problem, because if you're born in Africa and the only mode of transportation is private, that's what you get. And so therefore you've got to make the most of whatever is accessible to you. And I think we need to think of the context of, is there a fairer model? Because I do feel that a lot of the rhetoric tends to surround itself around Western economies versus other economies who have other present issues. I do feel, though, that because of telecommunications, I see this movement, like Shalaka was saying, for people to think of the consequences of what's happening to other countries when we make those decisions. So for me, legislation has to be also in the context of, can we do things that as a global, as a world, as individuals, but in a global context, and think about the impacts on others as well. Because the same e-scooters that we're talking about, they get built in countries like Bangladesh, like in Vietnam. There are always interconnections to actions that we take on. Say it's like, we think that battery cars are green, but they're not. It's a fallacy. The reality is these batteries, they have to be charged. And so in the US, what's the biggest energy generation? Coal and nuclear. In Europe, coal and nuclear. In Canada, we may be green because we have more hydro, but the fact is, batteries need to be charged, and they're using fossil fuel generated electricity. That's one thing. The second thing is what happens to those batteries. So again, in our eager to do something that is right, we do 5 things that are not so right. So again, thinking in the context of actions and what are the impacts on the world, because these batteries, well, guess what? The raw materials that come from where? Ivory Coast, the Amazonia, so the impact to the environment is worse. So in trying to do something that is right, we do something that could actually have even greater consequences on the environment. So I think it doesn't get talked about, but someone should ask Elon Musk, what happens? Where do you get those raw materials? And how do you discharge those batteries? And, how do you account for the fossil fuel that gets used to charge those batteries?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, right? We need to continue to build into our decision-making a life cycle thinking, right? We can't just start and stop with, oh, that choice looks better. It's about asking those critical questions, right? Around labor, around the travel it takes to get to us. And these are things that I think are, because of what you said, telecommunications, we're connected, we're hopefully accessing that information more regularly, which is important in our collective decision making. But I also want to note that there can be a real heaviness to that constant news cycle, right? Of this decision is a little bit better, but not that great. And I don't think that guilt can just be downloaded on the individual level, right? That's when you start to get a lot of eco-anxiety amongst the generation that weighs on us, right? And I think the way to negate that downloading responsibility just on the individual is by building collective reason, right? Like if that's policy, if that's legislation, if that's fighting together for building better. And I think that's really essential, especially on the mobility front, where sometimes it can be individualized. I just need to go from here to here, but it can't be individualized. That's just going to continue to perpetuate that cycle of harm that we're seeing in these sort of downloading of responsibilities.
I was wondering if you have anything else that you wanted to add.
My final thought is, I'm optimist. I think as a human being, when I look at the impact of Generation Z, wanting to take action, thinking about the consequences of one's action, and thinking about, in a holistic manner, because all actions do have an impact. And I think it's important to think about, how does one's action fit into the context of global humanity? Because to me, that's the tragedy, is that we look at only what matters to us versus what matters to those also around us. Can we be in harmony? It's a tough life to live when you're thinking about this, because the whole world wasn't built around that. But I am so optimistic because now I see people like Shalaka, or like yourself, Marisa, having these dialogues and thinking about, okay, can I make an educated choice? Is this that big of a sacrifice not to drive? I would say the answer is no. In fact, I haven't driven that much in the past year and a half. I don't miss it, and I feel good about it. And so, I think this pandemic, what we have learned is that we can go through incredible change in such a short period of time. And this, to me, proves that, we can do amazing things. Look, 6 months ago, we didn't have a vaccine for COVID-19. So within a very, very short period of time, the whole world got together on a same problem to solve it. And the commonality was everybody was working together. And I think same with shared and electrified and green mobility, with the efforts coming from the Generation Z and people like myself who are concerned about, causal effect. I think we have a great future ahead of us.
If anything, witnessing the sort of restrictions and changes through COVID-19 are a glimpse into what we'll experience as the climate crisis worsens, right? We're going to see some really, really difficult things that we cannot reverse unless we take this collective action together. And that needs to happen on every level, not just the individual. To download it on the individual level is really doing us a disservice of the immense power that we have collectively. And I think that's really something that we need to look towards in the mobility space, especially where sometimes, solutions do look like, oh, just get this nicer car or this green car. It's bigger than that. It's about looking at how are we embedding reliable and independent mobility choices for everyone, regardless of race, class, gender, disability. It's about, making sure there's safety and agency in those choices, not just, I need to take that because it's my only choice. There's a lot of joy that we need to embed in these solutions because that's such a powerful way to move forward. And I think we just got to commit. And that commitment comes with some hard choices and compromise. But it's a really important one to do. And compromise doesn't always need to be, negative. It can open you up to new opportunities and new choices that otherwise you weren't open to. And why not? I think the last couple months have really shown us that commitment to looking towards something different can reveal a lot.
You have to keep in mind, Greta, she enlisted her parents, right? And so there's the parents who have access, who also are engines of the economy as well. So when you make economic decisions, and you can use your buying power and you can mobilize others to do the same. Corporations have a lot to say, but corporations, they only move when it affects the bottom line. because their sole purpose in life is to improve the bottom line. So when they see that it's actually good for the bottom line to actually look at, accelerating green cars, accelerating shared mobility, and making it more accessible, then change does happen. And I think that mobilization, but also putting your money where your mouth is, also speaks volume.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that wraps it up really nicely. Thank you again so much for the both of you for taking the time to speak with us about Youth as an Accelerator.
Thank you for having us.